Okay, shall we start? Good evening. My name is Tatiana Zahler. I'm a lawyer with Bennett Jones and a member of the Board of Directors of Toronto Crew. It is my pleasure to welcome you this evening to our signature event, The Collective Wisdom of High-Performing Women, Leadership Lessons from the Judy Project. Before we begin, acknowledging the land is an Indigenous tradition used to express gratitude to those who reside here and to honor the Indigenous people who have lived and worked on the land historically and presently. We would like to begin by acknowledging the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is currently home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississaugas and the Chippewa bands. On the topic of gratitude, today's program was organized by the very hardworking members of Toronto Crew's Programs Committee, and I would like to recognize the special efforts of Adriana Frisch and Brad Gibson for their work in making this evening a success. We would also like to recognize our signature sponsor, Pacific Paving Limited. We are grateful for their support of this evening's program and of Toronto Crew as a whole. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for this evening, Colleen Moorehead. Colleen is Chief Client Officer of Osler Hoskin Harcourt LLP, and she is responsible for implementing Osler's client-focused business development strategy. Colleen is also the co-founder and business director of the Judy Project at the University of Toronto's Rotman School of Management. This initiative is a leadership forum designed to empower and prepare women to take on executive leadership positions. Colleen is also the editor of the best-selling leadership book and foundation of this evening's discussion, The Collective Wisdom of High-Performing Women, Leadership Lessons from the Judy Project. Colleen, thank you for being here with us this evening.
It's my pleasure to be here. I might actually try this, because I was thinking I would look too, kind of look scary, but sorry about that. I'm delighted to be here. I am so grateful that Crew, who I have worked with in the past, invited us to be part of this evening, and that members of Crew are enjoying the book. So I'm really, really thankful that you have, in fact, included us tonight. It is a great opportunity for us to share the stories from the Judy Project. And I understand everybody got a copy of the book. And in fact, we're showcasing two of the readers from the book, or authors from the book, who had whose stories most related to the people who set up the night. Adriana, for sure. So I appreciate being here. I thought if I could, I'd give you a little bit of a background of the Judy Project and also why we wrote the book. And then I'm going to ask for 3 storytellers to tell their stories. And then hopefully we can get into a very lively Q&A. These things are really most interesting when we get to the part where we engage with you and you ask us questions and you relate to the stories or your own stories. So that's what I'm hoping that we will achieve tonight. So I want to start by talking a little bit about the Judy Project. It is at Rotman. It is for 30 women every year, and it is for women who are 3 to 5 years from the C-suite. It's called the Judy Project because it's named after a woman. Her name was Judy Elder, and she did a speech in 2020 on the power of female ambition. And she discussed collective ambition. And that, for any of us who were in the audience, at that time I was CEO of E-Trade Canada, and she was running Microsoft Online. And I really related, as did Lorna Bornstein, one of the other founders of the project, to her words, because she talked about, I would call it a nobler form of ambition, where you are ambitious for your team, you're ambitious for the people that you report to. Oh no, that is my dog. He's found the toy again. Come here, Kelly. She'll stop. At a minimum, I'll get it from her while Beth is reading her story. But what I mean by the collective ambition is the last place that she thought about ambition was really in herself per se. It was always about this collective approach to making the organization and the business better as a group. And it really was something that resonated to me and to all of the women in the audience. And 3 weeks later, she died of a disease that most of us, well, none of us knew that she had, and that she had dealt with her entire life. It was a blood disorder. And when she died 3 weeks later, we really had a desire to make sure that, that her vision of ambition, which resonated with us, would continue. So we spoke to her husband, we spoke to Microsoft, and then we went out to the community and began the Judy Project. And so our first group was in 2003. And now there are 450 women that have gone through the Judy Project. We call it a bit of a leadership spa because it focuses really on building your voice, building your leadership strengths, and allowing you a reflective moment to think about what you want to do and how you want to achieve the goals that you have for yourself. The week is very full, and at the end of it, you leave with a personal advisory board of other women from the program who are there beside you and will support you as you go on and try to achieve the things that you so much want to do. So the program went on for probably 10, 12 years. And lots of times at the bar at night, after a full day at the Judy Project, people would talk about how could we make a larger impact with the Judy Project? Because it really, you know, there's 30 women on that program. And even though they go away and they do things in their organization, they do amazing things in their organization, not just as leaders, but also as things around gender leadership and inclusiveness and supporting diversity. And many of the corporate programs in Canada began with women from the Judy Project. So at year 10 or so, there was this idea that we might maybe do a book. But other than that, not too much. Not a lot of meat on the bone, but a fair amount of drinking, I might add, which is why I celebrate tonight with a glass of wine with you guys too. But then when it came up to our anniversary of our 16th year, we chose to decide to launch the call out for stories for this book. Many women celebrate what I would call, and what we do call in the book, values-based leadership. They're characteristics we maybe learned on our mom's knee. They're things that we learned about the way we should treat other people and how to lead in a caring way. So the basis of the book, we went out to the 450 women, we collected 70 stories, and now you have the book. And over the course of doing the book, since it was published in April of 2019, we've probably sold 15,000 or so copies. We've probably had more than 10,000 women and brave men attend our events. And our format is the same. It is storytelling because we believe, and one of the goals in the book is to use honest corporate storytelling to drive learned behavior or change in our organizations. We think one of the things about storytelling is you listen to it, you pull the pieces that you think are relevant to you, and then you leave the pieces behind that aren't relevant. So we believe that storytelling is one of the characteristics that we think are very valuable in our organizations. And we also want it to be honest. Not everything in corporate life is easy. There are choices we all make. And that's also partly what you were reading in the book. The second thing that we wanted to achieve in terms of objectives in the book was we wanted to encourage women to help foster confidence in our young women. One of the things, and I tease because confidence is like a patina that grows on us as we get older until you become my mom and you say anything you want to. It comes straight out of your mouth, even though it maybe shouldn't. But there is a period that as we mature, confidence is a lot easier thing, but it's not easy for our young women. And it certainly isn't easy in this post-pandemic world where they are really just re-entering business in the flesh. So that was a second thing. And then the last is we were asking women to actually use their voices and their power to pull women up through mentoring. One of the interesting things that we find, and we often do it at events, I'll ask women under the age of 30 how comfortable they are asking someone to mentor them. And it is across the board, one of the more challenging things for our young women to do is to actually go, hey, would you mind having a coffee with me, helping give me advice? And so we're asking you in the audience to also help young women by providing counsel, by supporting them and helping them track through their career and build their confidence. So that was the reason for the book. As I mentioned, I am very pleased. If there are, I can't quite see guys in the room. I thank you because almost all of us in the storytelling mode were sponsored and mentored by men, brave men who took risks and put us forward. And that is why we've had the opportunities we have. So we'll never be successful at getting the change that we want if only 50% of the world wants those changes. So to the men in the audience, thank you very much. And thank you for being allies. So that's kind of all I wanted to say in this part. And I would now like to go to our storytelling. And I'm going to start with Beth. And that's because I started with Beth. So when we were going to do the book, Beth had shared a story with me, and it was so powerful to me and so articulated some of the hurdles that we had that I told her was deeply personal, but I would promise forever to be grateful for her sharing her story. And I've asked her to read it tonight. Beth is CEO of Denton's Canada and has an amazing story and has been a wonderful mentor for many women, and through the Judy Project has come back and come to the Judy Project every year as a leader. So Beth, it's over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Colleen, and big hug to you as always. And the interesting thing, I'm sure I've told you this, Colleen, but the act of you asking me to consider writing down my story in and of itself led to a huge act of courage for me, because it forced me really to find a way to tell my story that I was comfortable with in a way that I felt I could. So thank you for that. I am forever, ever grateful. So my story is called Competing for the Top Job. I was hiking solo on top of a mountain in Colorado in 2017 when I made a brave decision to leave the company I'd been at for 26 years. I'd had a great career at KPMG Canada, starting straight out of university and progressing quickly through the ranks. In fact, for the past 11 years, I'd held senior leadership roles, and I had all the ingredients I could ask for to be successful there: talent, work ethic, opportunity, support, sponsorship, and a desire to have an impact. Yet I knew that leaving my job, without even having another one to go to, was absolutely the right thing for me. So let me explain why. Back in 2006, I feel really dated now, Colleen, I attended the Judy Project. I had just been appointed as KPMG's Chief Human Resources Officer. It was my first big leadership role. And I was excited, scared, a little overwhelmed, and pretty lonely in terms of finding a group of people I could be comfortable talking to about the challenges I was facing. So the Judy Project came at the right time, and it really awoke in me the courage to call my desire to have impact something different. I learned it was okay for women to call it ambition and to embrace it. So I returned to work ready to tackle each new challenge with renewed energy in order to learn and to stretch myself. And during those years, I learned and grew as a leader. I began to see in myself what other colleagues, including my CEO, had told me they saw, which was CEO potential. Don't get me wrong, I love being an audit practitioner and a client service partner, but I was always drawn to these other initiatives, firms, committees, task forces, anywhere where I could make a broader difference. And I came to realize I wanted to contribute in a way that went beyond what I'd been doing. I wanted to lead from the top, and I was intrigued by the opportunity to bring my vision to life and unleash the potential of our people in a talent-driven organization. Over the next 10 years, I focused on building my portfolio of experiences, learning from each role I had. I was trying to become a more impactful leader. But it was in 2013 when I was on a 3-month sabbatical, which the firm encourages for partners during their careers, when I was really able to focus most intently on taking the next step in forming my vision. My family took the trip of a lifetime to the Galapagos. We spent the summer at our cottage, and I journaled and I read, including fundamental books like Simon Sinek's Start With Why, Clayton Christensen's How Will You Measure My Life? And I thought a lot about the mistakes I had made in leadership, what I had learned from them, my strengths. And it was just so useful to have that time to step away for it all and become more self-aware and reflect on actions that I wanted to take to improve. And then in 2016, the CEO succession process commenced at KPMG. And people don't talk very much about what it is like to get into that arena as a woman, but I'm here to tell you it's pretty intense. I was the first woman at KPMG to do so, and I was almost the first female CEO of a Big Four professional services firm in Canada. So even though I could tick every box on the competency and experience checklist, I was scrutinized intensely as a female leader. I found I was studied in painful detail. Every person I had ever promoted, every business decision I had made, the way I spoke, dressed, and even presented on stage. I heard conflicting criticisms. She's too people-oriented and too soft, versus she's not consultative enough and she's too directive, not authentic enough, not personal enough, not a good role model, works too hard, has had it too easy, and she's too ambitious and she's too perfect. For example, I was told that my delivery in public speaking felt overly rehearsed and was being perceived as not truly authentic. And my messaging and delivery was something that I worked really hard on because I wanted people to hear my words, to understand my vision and experience me as a leader, calm, confident, and compelling. Instead, those things often got lost because people spent time debating whether I was too polished or perfect or not speaking from the heart. And I was always authentic and passionate. Plus, I thought about the detail and the delivery in advance, and I practiced. I often wondered if anyone had ever told a man that he was too good at public speaking. And what I experienced during that time frame reminds me a lot of similar criticisms of Hillary Clinton during the same time period. Still, I pressed on. I really surprised myself to find out how deeply I could reach for the strength I needed to face the politics, ignore the criticisms, confident in my track record, and really passionate about my vision. And with the support of my family the whole way, I gave it my all. But on a Friday morning, after deliberations to choose the next CEO were finally finished, I got the phone call from the board chair. I had not been selected. I went home. God knows why I even thought it was a good idea to be in the office to receive that call, but I drove home, walked into the house, and I had a really good cry while my 18-year-old son hugged me. Still get emotional thinking about that. I don't think the fact that I wasn't chosen was explicitly about being a woman. I do believe that organizations still really struggle with a different style of female leadership. I find women are inclusive, they're collaborative, they're consensus oriented, they're more people centric, they're drawn to the power of talent and are better at systems type thinking. So it could have been a combination of factors. Politics, my strategy didn't resonate with the board. Regardless, that is when I discovered that I had more courage than I imagined. Courage for my final act, which would be to leave. So I booked a trip to Colorado the next day because I wanted to heal. My younger son was going there for Outward Bound, and I decided to fly down with him and go solo to a resort. I wanted to follow my own rhythm, do whatever I felt like doing, which was lots of contemplation, spa treatments, hiking. But I also wanted to go solo because I didn't want to worry about the impact of me being sad on those I was with. So there I was on one of these hikes when I came to the realization that there must be something bigger for me to lead, that I had to leave the comfort of the organization I'd been part of for over a quarter century and am still deeply loyal to, and leap into the abyss. I had only the faith that I'd discover that next opportunity in due course. And of course, later that year, I became the CEO of the Canadian region of the world's largest law firm, Dentons. I'm not a lawyer. It was a pretty bold and strategic move by Dentons to go outside the firm for their next CEO and target a non-lawyer, a change agent. And for the record, I don't think my gender factored into the hiring decision one way or the other. But as I said goodbye to my female colleagues at KPMG, I felt it was really important to share my courage and support and to pass on my learnings to them. And I left them several thoughts via an email, which I would like to read to you. From Beth Wilson to all my female partners, goodbye and a few thoughts for your action. Many of you have had conversations with me in the last few months that had a big impact. So as I depart, I feel compelled as a woman who loves KPMG and believes in your potential to send you some thoughts and include 3 small, maybe big asks. I reached for the top rung and failed. Yes, I just used the F word, and I'm okay with that. Nope, I didn't say that I'm a failure. I merely said I failed, which is true. And so my first ask is that you get comfortable with this as well. You should embrace that I tried, understand why I wasn't successful, explore it, pull it apart, ask tough questions about it. Because if you don't explore it, you can't learn from it. The institution can't learn, leaders can't learn, and most importantly, women can't learn. Second, I ask of you, don't be afraid to reach really, really high. Don't be afraid to fail, because if you don't reach out of fear of failure, you will never know what could have been. And the world won't have the benefit of your talented leadership at senior levels. I had a lot of boxes checked and I still didn't make it. And that's all the more reason why you should push, and you should push hard. And third, please help each other. You have to help each other. If you felt at all compelled to do something after my unsuccessful bid to become CEO, then make a commitment today to truly help one another. Well, what does help look like? Something like the following is a good place to start. First, recognize, celebrate, and talk about each other's accomplishments and strengths using powerful business language. She's a great operator. She has a great eye for talent. She's active in the market. What a great business developer. Knows how to make tough decisions. Second, don't get sucked into rock chucking. There are enough people lined up criticizing all leaders, male or female. Please don't throw rocks at one of your own. We women are as guilty as men for criticizing women and falling prey to all of our unconscious bias. She's too soft, too perfect, not authentic, poor judgment on that last decision, etc. And third, leverage your voice to ensure women are on every slate. Leverage your position to advocate for them and influence their decisions. There continue to be inordinate, subtle challenges for female candidates for any leadership role. And so you have to over-rotate to support them. And that takes courage and a willingness to let your own personal brand come under fire. I am convinced that KPMG has a future female CEO in its midst today, and I would love to see the firm make it a reality before I'm too old to recognize the name. I hope you take up the challenge and you make it happen. I'm leaving KPMG not because I failed to become CEO, I'm leaving because I want to continue to grow as a leader and because my work is not done. And I wish each of you all the best in your personal and professional endeavors. I wish KPMG future success to thrive as the great organization it's meant to be. Make me proud. I'll be watching with anticipation and cheering for all of you. I want to hear the stories of how you reached, failed, learned, pulled another woman along, reached again, and succeeded. So please keep in touch. Forever a supporter and an advocate for you, Beth. And that is my story, Colleen.
You know, Beth, every time you read your story, I get more out of it. And it's like the first time. The examples of ways that you can bring other women along, your poise as you went through it. I just think it's got so many lessons for all of us. And I'm really grateful that the book starts with your story. So thank you. Our next reader is Monique Allen. She is Executive Vice President, leading technology at OMERS. She's probably next to Beth, well, maybe even as many roadshows with me on the book. We did a cross Canada tour to the West and had a great time together. But her story is a really great one. I actually have her doing it to a set of young women in a couple weeks, because I think we have to, even for our young women, remember that we're turning the light down. So I am going to leave it with that. And Monique, go.
Thank you, Colleen. And I'm going to echo what you said, Beth. I've heard your story so many times, and I think the power, this is new since COVID. Right? Does anybody else in the audience have this? Yeah. The power of storytelling is every time you hear a story, you hear what you need to hear. And so, Beth, I've heard your story countless times now. I've read the story. I've got the whole book on Audible, and I listen to it when I'm driving from time to time because there's always a gem that I take out of it. I also cry with you every time you get to that part, which is usually a surefire indication that I'm going to cry in my story. So here we go. My story is called The Trap of Unconscious Bias. When my stepdaughter Lauren was 5, she looked up at me from her breakfast one morning with curious brown eyes, hair and pigtails, and said, "Monique, tell me about God." You never really prepared for those delicate questions, are you? I took a few minutes to think before answering. I wanted to leave enough space in my answer that Lauren could start to form her own beliefs and ensure they left room for accepting different forms of God. I kept my response simple, focusing on values and unyielding love for everyone. She seemed to accept my answer, paused thoughtfully, and then responded, I wonder what she looks like. My jaw dropped. Naturally, why wouldn't she think God could be a woman? At 5, she hadn't yet been conditioned by the world around her to think anything different. She had no biases, conscious or unconscious. I found myself in a moment where I was immensely proud of this little girl's thinking and optimistic for the life she had ahead of her. I saw a little girl who had a world of opportunity in which she might not be constrained by gender stereotypes and the biases of generations before. For years, that moment stuck with me. I started to see my world differently. As I walked the floor at the office and as I sat in meetings, I saw a generation of young women and young men for whom I might be making a difference. A generation who might not feel constrained by which parent took parental leave or how they shared it between them. A generation of young minds who collaborated around the table equally and accepted each other as leaders. A generation where young women might not have to adopt masculine attributes to be accepted as leaders. I myself was part of a mostly female technology leadership team led by a female CIO. I was proud of the changes it felt like we were making and excited about the future we were building so that girls and young women wouldn't hesitate to think that they were equally suited for a variety of roles. A future where it would be only natural for them to see a woman in a leadership role as a boss, a CEO, a prime minister, or a president. But my excitement about the progress we're making was dampened, and I realized that we still have a long way to go before we reinvent our mindset and eliminate unconscious bias. I had had the opportunity to participate in an unconscious bias workshop, and amongst a group of senior leaders, of whom less than 10% were women, the aggregate outcome showed a strong male bias. This was in another role in another organization at the time, going back a few years now. Perhaps I shouldn't find that outcome so unusual amongst my peers. Bias is a product of our own environment, after all, and there's no denying that while so much positive change had occurred, we were raised in a time when many professions were dominated by men, and it was unusual to see women in leadership roles. It's the awareness of unconscious bias that's important. We can catch ourselves in those default patterns and challenge our perceptions, our decisions, the way we communicate, and the standards to which we hold others. We must continue to purposely shape and reinvent the environment we're building for the leaders who will follow in our footsteps. We need to be deliberate about creating a world of opportunity. It's equally important to me at home that both my stepson and stepdaughter see men and women with equal potential. So imagine my surprise one evening when I got caught in my own gender bias trip up. My husband, Scott, and I were reflecting on a recent airline incident in which the pilot was forced to make an emergency landing. He must have had to rely on his instruments, I remarked. Scott gave me that same look the kids give me when I've just said something that doesn't really make sense, and he replied, "The pilot was a woman." Ouch, me as a champion of breaking gender stereotypes. And despite all the sponsorship I bring and the values I support, we're all fighting that unconscious bias that our world still reinforces around us. I decided to test Lauren, now 13, and see how she would react to the same story. At the dinner table, I recounted the pilot story and asked her what she thought about the pilot situation. And she paused and said, "It's a good thing he had the training to be able to react like that." Here we were, 8 years later, sitting at the very same table with Lauren's pigtails now exchanged for a braid tailing down the length of her back. And this young lady fell into the very same unconscious bias trap I had. After I told Lauren I had made the same wrong assumption about the pilot's gender, we looked at each other and nodded with a silent understanding. Yes, we have come a long way, but there's still work to do and influence to be made to continue challenging our assumptions and reinventing the perception of the roles women can hold.
Thank you, Monique. I hope we talk about that a little bit afterwards as well, because I think we often don't recognize that some of our biases are just endemic, and how, the example with Lauren just breaks my heart, but I know it to be true. So thank you for that. Now I'm going to introduce our next storyteller, and she probably doesn't need an introduction to anybody here. Karen Sweet is joining us. As you know, she is the practice chair of Accenture's Canadian real estate practice. Accenture has also, and I'm going to give a big shout out, that they have done a lot of events with us. And so when I knew Karen was the incoming head of crew, and we talked about it, I thought, well, this is an enormous opportunity to talk to all of you about how your own storytelling can really make a difference. So I asked her if she would write her own story. And she's been at events, so she knew the shtick. And I said, it can't be lessons to everyone. It's got to be a story that you think people can leverage into in terms of learning. And of course, no question, she was up for the task. And she wrote a wonderful story that I got to read for the first time last week. And although she wasn't part of the Judy Project, she is an honorary Judy Project author of Collective Wisdom. And so I really appreciate the fact that you were willing and writing your story and then telling it to a group of women that you know very well, and helping show that leadership about why storytelling can drive really changes in women's confidence and their view of the world ahead. So Karen, thank you, and floor is yours.
So Thank you, Colleen. I have to say how awed and inspired I am to be included in the collection of Judy Project story writers and participants. It's a real honor to have been asked, and I'm really excited to share my story today. I think Colleen's the only one who's seen it because, true to form, for those of you who know me, it was not quite done when we got to the run through, but I promise you it is here today, and I'm super excited to share. So this is my story. My daughter is a circus performer. She's 9, so unless you're her instructor or you're related to her, you haven't seen her perform yet. But every day she spends most of her spare time upside down or in the air, dangling from hoops or aerial silks. And because she's 9, she wanted her mom to try it too. So I did. I signed up for the beginner aerial fitness class. And on the first day, I warmed up, I stretched, chalked my hands, and stayed on the ground. I could not get in the hoop. And in fact, I spent the first 5 weeks of class trying to get in the hoop, building the strength and the stamina and the coordination just to pull myself up. Each class I tried and I struggled, and I will be honest, I nearly gave up. The thought of what came next and how hard the rest of it must be was entirely overwhelming. But a funny thing happened. One day, when I finally got into the hoop, I figured out that I was actually pretty good at doing some of the moves. Getting in the hoop turned out to be the single hardest part for me, and I discovered that I had some skills and talent that couldn't have shown up on the ground. I had to be in the hoop to discover them. So you might be thinking, okay, that's great, but what does this have to do with work and career? Well, this is where it all comes together. About 5 years ago, I was in a good job with a good team and a path laid out for me. All I needed to do really was to continue to perform, and I had a good road ahead. But I realized that the road ahead that was laid out was not the road that I wanted to be on. It didn't align with my goals and my ambitions for myself. I had a bit of a crisis of confidence as I debated what I should do. I could clearly envision the type of role I wanted, the type of work I wanted to be doing, but I also knew that my resume and experiences didn't tell that story. And so I had a choice to make. I could keep doing what I was doing. I could try to get someone to take a leap of faith on me and hire me for a role for which I appeared on paper to be profoundly unqualified, or I could try to do it myself. So I quit. I struck out on my own to try my hand at consulting. I leveraged my crew, took on projects by myself, and did my best to convince people that I really could do this. And it was hard. It was really hard. I spent most days wondering if I'd made the right decision, pushing to get jobs and doubting myself. And then one day I got a call asking if I'd help lead a project for Accenture at a real estate firm. Well, of course I said yes. And I jumped in with all of my energy and all of that ambition that I'd been holding for myself into this dream role. What I discovered when I got into the project was that, yes, I had been right. I could do this. And I realized that I was good at things I hadn't had the chance to do before, like converting text speak to business speak, gaining consensus, developing roadmaps, storytelling, all things I wouldn't have known until I was in there and got past that first big challenge. And what I took away was this. Encountering a large challenge doesn't mean you can't succeed on the overall path or that it's not meant to be. Big hurdles aren't always showstoppers, and they aren't always a sign of bigger challenges to come. Not everything will be that hard. Sometimes you have to make that effort and push through to discover aspects of yourself that you didn't even know existed. Sometimes getting in the hoop is the hardest part. But if you can find the confidence and put in the effort to do it, it's worth it. You won't know what hidden talents you might have or what you can achieve until you're up in the air. And that's my story.
That's an amazing story. And I think of the parallels to Beth's story, right? And
It's an amazing story. I love a new story, Colleen. Is this the first chapter of the second edition of
next book? Next
Karen,
book.
beautiful. Congratulations.
It is a fantastic story. And I think it also sort of showcases one of the things that we can work with young women about is just the belief that you have to already know how to do it. And that, you often see people thinking about a next role and they're young woman saying, well, I don't have all of those characteristics. And I often kind of go, well, the guy who's applying for the job has got 30 or 50%. You can do a lot from getting in the hoop. You're going to make your focus and all of the characteristics you bring that are great to the world of performing. And so thank you for that. So it was fantastic. It was a great story. And look at that. There's already a bravo, Karen. Now I'm trying to think about how we're doing Q&A. Wait a minute. Let me open up the chat. Is that what I'll open up chat and see? Oh yeah, there's all sorts of great stories in there. A great story about overcoming imposter syndrome and moving past doubt and fear into action and excellence. Thank you, Farah, for saying that. So please do it. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to put forward? Trisha's saying she's already inspired, so she don't have to worry about any more. But if there is questions that you have, we'd be happy to answer them. You can direct it to one of the speakers, or we'll flip it around to everybody. I think one of the things that that when Andrea was talking about this event is it's how do we encourage women to reach higher, to reach into these leadership roles? So here's one for Beth. How do you develop your career action plan to achieve a C-suite role? What were the most critical steps to take when you were just beginning your career?
Yeah, so there's no playbook. I guess maybe I made it sound very well thought out in my story through the use of limited words, but I would say that what I focused most on was having impact. And if I was on a committee or a task force, or when I was in a new role, really trying to focus on not so much the title, but how do I leave the team better, the function better, the business unit better? How do I ensure that I have impact when I'm in the role? And I found that by focusing on having impact and less on sort of titles and the path, that the opportunities came my way. And part of my lesson around that actually came from the CEO at KPMG. It was a big part of the early part of my career, Bill McKinnon. And he had reached down, pulled a very young partner, me, into that chief HR officer role. And I was a year into the role, and we sat down for a sandwich, and he said, I bet you think you're doing a good job. And I wasn't sure how to react to that. And I said, well, what do you think? And he said, yeah, he said, you're doing a good job, but I didn't put you in the role to do a good job. What's your legacy going to be? He said, you've got a year, maybe two left in this role before you need to move to something else. What's your legacy going to be? And that really stuck with me because I went away and I pulled up my bootstraps, frankly, to make sure I was doing more than just a good job.
Now, maybe I'd ask Monique and then Karen to answer that same question. Like, what are the things you do now to prepare for that C-suite job? Monique, what's your view?
When I think about what you want in a C-suite job, right? So in my background was a joint background in business and technology. And so I thought, well, what does a C-suite leader really do, right? And a C-suite leader can get to outcomes, get to impact through a variety of experiences and a really deep understanding on how the organization works, how the business works, and most importantly, their clients and what's important to their clients. So I'll say throughout my career, and what I get asked similar questions, and when I coach or mentor anyone, usually my advice to them is look for a variety of experiences that demonstrate that you have a diversity of skill sets. And in that, getting that, delivering with impact and finding new hoops that you can get into, it is a confidence builder, and it demonstrates your versatility as a leader, that you can operate on different teams, exercise different skill sets, learn new skill sets, and anchor that back, always driven into the, and why are we doing this? What's the direction that we're moving towards in the role? And sometimes that happens in the organization that you're in. And then Beth told a great story that path, she thought she was going in one place, but it's all of those skill sets that I'm certain are making her successful in the role that she's in a landscape that she didn't grow up in. And I've got to imagine that was a brand new hoop, Beth, for you, and learning the lay of the land. And I also imagine that you had a bit of confidence knowing that you had done it in other roles before, and that with persistence and learning and asking good questions and anchoring on some of those fundamentals, that you'd get you'd arrive in the same place to be able to.
I agree with you, Monique. The variety of experience, whatever that might be, is important, but it ties nicely to Karen's story, right? Because that means you have to get in a different hoop all the time,
Absolutely.
even though it's really uncomfortable and you're taking a risk, right? Because you're leaving a role where you're high performing, and you have to take a risk each time that you can learn from and replicate, which is challenging.
Karen, any reflections for you on that?
I mean, there's been so much good stuff said already, and I completely agree with the diversity of experience and looking at the objectives. I think the one thing that for me that always I think of when I look at people in the C-suite is the concept of accountability. They always say with like a CEO that the buck stops there, that's where that comes down to. And so the one thing that I try to apply no matter what role I'm in is real accountability for what I'm being asked to do, right? Or what I'm asking of myself to do. Because at the end of the day, you know, when I started, I always had a boss I could turn to, and I still have bosses and mentors and guides, certainly. But at the end of the day, if I'm delivering on my results, I have to deliver on my results. And so I have to think of all the tools and the levers that I have to work with. I have to inspire my team to want to work on those same objectives. I have to understand what those objectives are, and I have to understand that it stops with me. And that doesn't mean that other people don't contribute, but I have to own the objectives that I'm laying out for myself. And I have to make sure that when the team is involved and whoever else I'm working on with them, that we're all in this together to get to that end goal. And that's one of the things that the leaders that I admire most really are those ones who do take accountability, who will be the ones who will step up and say, no, this is on me, and try to, and always ask, what can I do better next time when there's a mistake? Not what you need to do better next time, but what can we do better next time if something doesn't go the right way?
And I think the other thing I'd ask you all to reflect on, and many of you are in what I would call revenue jobs. And so the opportunity in revenue jobs is significant in the Canadian economy, and the new economy, and in the real estate economy, and in the prop tech economy. So think about what traits and skills you have and where they are leverageable into other organizations or roles. Those skills go with you. They are part of your package. So don't underestimate your ability to apply them in a different way. And that's what I got to say about that. Okay. So I think next question, Adriana has a great one, which is, I'd like to know what you think is still missing to men to understand that we are capable, smart as them, and that women have the confidence and believe that they can be whatever they want. Who wants that one? Hands up. Don't be so fast.
For men to understand.
I don't know if it's what's missing. I reflect back on my story and the experiences I have, and when I did the unconscious bias workshop in the role that I was referring to, different organization, and in the role I'm in now, I think that's the big piece. It's that unconscious bias that I think we often confuse with values. And I think you'll have many men, many women say, yeah, but I see myself as a bit of a feminist. I want my daughter to be successful. And what they don't realize is how unconscious bias trips into that, where we get caught in some of those traps where perhaps we don't hear the same thing said the same way when it's said in a different tone. The story that I usually tell in the setting that I was in that really caught the attention of some of my male counterparts. Remember, I was 10% women in that SMT. We were debating unconscious bias, and I said, I've spent my career having to square up to the table and lower my voice and speak a bit louder to get heard. And one of the gentlemen, who was a typical sales oriented, very vibrant, very gregarious, he stopped and he said, "You got my attention. And now I understand what you mean, because the minute you spoke in that tone, I was ready to listen. But when you were quiet in the background and you politely put your hand up and you asked for your moment and you waited for your moment in conversation, I know now that I can think back and I know you had your hand up, but you needed to get my attention by jumping into the conversation." And so that sparked a really dynamic conversation amongst that senior leadership team, and that awareness of that group in particular was defensive, that they had values that supported women in roles, but what they were not making the connection was that unconscious bias in how we expect people to show up in their roles. So I would answer the question in that way, that it's not necessarily what's missing, but instead what's the awareness, and how do we continue to bring that awareness into our culture and our organizations. And it really is a great time where all of us are promoting a culture of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that equity plays an important role. And the more aware we are of where that bias creeps in, the more we can undo those behaviors to create a more equitable space.
I think one of the decision biases, and let's face it, it's still largely men who are making promotion decisions, et cetera. One of the decision biases is that as human beings, we look for evidence, right, that this person will be successful. And so a piece of evidence we look to, well, who do we know that is kind of like that person that we've seen be successful in the role? Oh, that other white male who's got the same kind of persona and experience, et cetera. We know that works. So what's missing, frankly, Colleen? More women in these senior roles, like more variety of role models, people modeling leadership in a different way, modeling the leadership characteristics that we talk about in the Judy Project book, right? We need more of that so people can see that that's a highly effective way to lead. So
You would not be surprised that I could agree completely with that.
shocking.
Shocking. Can I pop down to one that I think I'll go back up, but I think this is an interesting question. What triggers did you have to know when you had to pivot and change your course? So either change a role or change an organization. Like, what are some of those triggers that says, you know what? And I do think, like, I know I can name some, so I'd like to hear from you guys first.
I don't mind taking this one first if that's okay. So I've actually not had to leave organizations very often. I've managed to have fairly long tenures in places. And in most cases, there's a few things. There's often a catalyst sort of moment, but the catalyst sort of moment sort of adheres to other things that have happened. I find that as I go, I try to take the time every couple of years to be reflective on where I'm at and where I want to be next, and kind of reorient. So if I think about the change that I mentioned in the story, at the time, two kind of things sort of happened at the same time. Number one, I realized I'd been in the role for a certain length of time, and I sort of thought about it and said, my next step, it's going to be harder if I take a next step up, a next step forward in this path, it's going to be much harder at that point for me to leap, because I was at one of those turning points where as you get into more and more senior roles, it can be challenging. I feel like there's a middle ground where once you get into quite senior roles, often you can move into other things, and when you're in junior roles, but there's this middle ground where you sort of are on a path. And that's just been my experience. And And so I kind of said, okay, before I get to that point where I have to make that decision, let me look at what this path looks like going forward. And the second thing that had happened was I'd had the opportunity to work on a project. So thinking about what Monique said about choosing diverse experiences, I had had a diverse experience and I had loved it. And I realized as I sat down to kind of look at my year in progress, that the thing that I enjoyed most, and not only that I enjoyed most, but I actually felt that my performance had been excellent in versus say my core job, was not my core job. And that was kind of the wake up call for me, was I'm spending a lot of time on this project. I am loving dedicating time to this project. I am getting positive feedback for this project. And it wasn't that I wasn't getting positive feedback in other areas, but I was getting more there. And I just kind of went, something's off. And that's exactly, it was just kind of like a something's off, and that triggered the deeper reflection and what went into it and all of those things. And so for me, that was kind of my indicator that that was my exit ramp, was at that time, and that it was something that I needed to do. And I'll just share anecdotally, when I was making the final decision, like the week before I actually turned in my resignation, I was sitting and I was at a cottage. I was out in a canoe with my husband. I'm sitting there, I'm going, do I do this? Do I leave? What do I do? Am I going to do this? And he looked at me, he goes, Karen, you're not even 40 yet. This is not your last job. Whatever you do, this is not your last job. You'll find something. Like, so take the time. We're ready for this. You've been thinking about it. Just go. And I kind of thought that's true. I'm not going to be permanently unemployed from the age of 4. I'll find something. If I have to climb back up, if I have to start at a lower level, that's fine. But he kind of, shook my head out of its, worry zone, and I went there. So there were a lot of different triggers. And in my other one, I guess, not to go too far into it, but it's the same sort of thing, right? Where I kind of went, this is as far as I can go in this role. What's the next role? And is that really the role I want to be in next? And looking for areas to grow. And if the areas to grow weren't the areas where I wanted to grow, then I needed to think about a change.
Monique, what are your triggers?
It's exactly as Karen just wrapped up with, right? When I felt that I had run out of opportunity for learning and growth, and if there wasn't a next role that I could see myself in, it was generally the trigger. But I haven't had many opportunities to change. I had 2 roles that lasted, or 2 organizations that I worked with for 10 years each, and really had a long run in that until the next role wasn't an appealing role for me, and I had sort of run out of opportunity for learning.
And Beth, your story actually is exactly that.
100%.
I'm not leaving because I don't want to be a KPMG. I'm leaving because I want to lead. And that is just understanding what you want to do next and understanding whether your organization can facilitate that. You have to have a deep understanding of your own skills so that you're not lying to yourself. But generally, most women are not lying to themselves. They're understating their own skills. So one of the things I remember saying to somebody right before I left is I said, I'm not leaving because I don't want to work here. I'm leaving because there's no more opportunity for me here. And I felt that. And so most of the jobs I ever took were always lower comp. And then, but I thought about them and they let me move to a different place. And so you have to build the arc of your own career.
And I think that changes over time too, Colleen, depending on sort of age and stage. So there are certain times when the learning curve is really steep and it's rich and exciting, and there's lots of opportunity for learning and personal growth kind of professionally. And then I find lots of women I talk to become quite reflective around impact, right? And where they feel fulfilled, and that sense of purpose as they reflect on the wisdom and experience they've had, and are they able to do that in the organization or role they're in? And that leads to often a big shift or transition, but probably a little further along.
Now, Beth, I'm going to tell you, you have to go into the chat and read what somebody wrote about you, about a Globe article that is framed in her office. I want you to read that while I give another question, because it's a completely brilliant shout out to you. I wanted to actually see if I could cover, there's two questions on mentorship. One is a younger woman sort of saying, is there mentorship circles? Is there mentorship programs? And how do I participate in it? And then there is another woman who is a young 60-year-old, the issue of ageism and not interested in retiring. How does she chart a next pathway? So maybe if you want to talk about both ends of that. Beth, you want to start?
I was reading this. No, I
You're
was
still
reading this
reading
trip down memory lane. So just so everybody knows what year that was 1992. So Floriana, good for you. If you still have our Eufy announcement framed in your office, how awesome is that? Thank you. That's very, it's just really touching. So thank you for sharing that, that memory with me. Appreciate it. So what was the question, Colleen? Because I was reading mentoring.
So for young women, how do they find either mentorship programs or programs where they can engage? And then on the opposite end, as a person in the latter part of your career, sometimes ageism does play. People think, oh, you must be getting close to wanting to retire, versus saying, no, I'm up. I'm ready for my next chapter.
So I have sort of mixed views on mentorship programs, actually, because some of the best mentoring experiences I've had as a mentee receiving mentoring have not been through a formal mentorship program, because frankly, there weren't necessarily a lot of those, right? Not that long ago. And they really came through relationships I developed, people I identified in the organization that I admired for one reason or another, and kind of proactively instigating them. On the other hand, I have loved being a mentor in some of these more formalized mentoring programs that exist, because it's been rewarding for me, because I'm getting connected to young women who are not in my normal sphere. They're not people I otherwise would have met, who would have said, hey, can I have some regular coffees with you? Or and they're from different industries, different walks of life, different backgrounds, and it's been really rewarding to learn from them and mentor them. So there are formal mentoring programs out there through a lot of the schools. There's WXN. If you're lucky enough, your organization has some kind of a mentoring program. But honestly, I wouldn't limit yourself to thinking the only place you can have even a good structured mentoring relationship is through a program. You can read and find kind of the basic recipe on how to have a good structured mentoring relationship and make sure your conversations are productive, and then reach out and identify someone and ask them if they'll be your mentor. And Colleen, to your point, you and I talk about this all the time. We never turn down and ask from a woman for coffee, and you and I refer them back and forth between each other regularly, but we do ask them to be purposeful and think about what they want to get out of a conversation ahead of time. So for those of you who are looking to get some mentoring, I would say be really thoughtful and purposeful about why and what you're hoping to get out of that, and that will direct you to the type of mentor that you need to be working with. Ageism's interesting, Colleen. I remember my mom, who's my idol, and she had a great career as a school teacher and then a principal, and then in the Federation. And she was really well respected by her male colleagues, and they listened to her voice, and she was innovative. And she said the one thing that really devastated her as she retired and then went to like these retired principals forums, etc., was as an older lady, her voice was no longer respected or heard. So it was almost as if in retirement and with her gray hair, she'd lost the respect when it should have been the opposite in terms of the wisdom and experience she had. And that really struck. My mom was really hurt by that, and that really stuck with me. And I thought, in lots of other societies, we value the wisdom from older women, right? It's highly respected, sought after, and valued. And so why are we not there yet? I think women, as we age, I think we have all kinds of things to offer, because a lot of the things that maybe made it challenging for us to do earlier in our career are not challenging anymore, right? Children are grown up. Maybe you're not dealing with aging parents anymore. You've got financial independence and therefore flexibility and choice to really choose the place you want to be. So I don't think we should let age restrict us.
Now, Megan pointed out that Crew has got a great mentoring program and it's on the website. So for sure, reference that. And the link is right there. So both Pam and Megan have popped it up there for you. So please do go. Monique or Karen, anything you want to add about either mentoring or ageism?
I would share a similar reflection to Beth in terms of having mixed emotions, and in two ways. And whenever I've looked for a mentor, it's generally been that something has connected me to somebody, that there is a skill that I admire, or that's something that I would like to emulate, that has attracted me to that person. And I've often sought them out because their style is one that resonates with me, and that I want to learn from their experiences. Like Beth, I would say I've probably had very few, if any, mentorship pairings that were set up on my behalf. They were all sought after by me in somebody that I wish to spend some time with and learn from. And as Beth said, whenever I was in those circumstances, or I've been asked to mentor, that notion of being prepared and making good use of the time that you have together with a mentor, and not only in being prepared for what you want to learn from them, but what you are prepared to action and bring back. And I think a mentor or a coach is there to be just that, and to coach you. So if you have, if you know what you want to achieve out of the relationship and what you want to try out, I think the most productive relationships I've had is when people actually do try it out and they come back and they tell you what their experiences have been and what they've learned. And your mentor can then act as a coach to give you some different tips to try out, or encouragement, and particularly if they don't work, right? And particularly if you tried something else that you didn't get in the hoop. And and that's where I think the most valuable relationships that I've had, both as a mentor and as a mentee.
The one thing I would also say is I do mentor, I do lots of, so I'll say I will take the first call with someone who wants to have a session or discussion about their aspirations. And then I always tell them, here's what you need to do for the second call in terms of setting up that. Here's what my expectations are, and how you will come to me. Because if it goes after that first, hey, good feeling, reflections, you really need to think about the value of your time and the value of the time that you're putting on the other person, and make sure it's a solid use of time for both of you. Now, I think there was another great one here on, because there's a lot of discussion these days on inclusive intent. And being intentional in your diversity initiatives, and how do we all live our lives with intent? I think the book really talks about value-based leadership, which really, when you read through to that is living with intent, living with your values. But I think there is a lot of great stuff around today. How do we understand, and your question is very good, which is specifically understanding the challenges of intersectionality that diverse women feel. Like, I am a white woman who I would say today is of privilege, right? I didn't start that way. I started dead rural poor, but today that's not my game or my thing. And so how do I make sure that I am remembering that the way I live is not the way everyone does, and how do you actually include what I say, intersectionality, and also that inclusive intent. So I'd love to hear what you guys think, because of course I respect everything you think. Who wants to go?
I don't mind starting with this one, although Farah gets to hear from me a lot, so she probably didn't want to hear me talk about this one. She can just call me. But you know what? There's a couple things I do hear, and I think to your point, Colleen, a lot of it is values based. The first thing is for me is just listen and learn and try to understand better. I think to your point. If I think back on my career, when I started, I was always like an ardent feminist, and I was always about that piece of it, right? And then over the course of time, the concept of intersectionality, the concept of additional biases towards women of color and other ethnic backgrounds, and queer identities, and all of these other things that came up sort of came on my radar. And it was kind of a stopping point for me to kind of go, oh, that's also something. And what I'm doing in my well-meaning attempts to promote women is maybe not always the best way. And I need to think about some of these other aspects of it. One of the things that I have is what I would probably refer to as as a mentor, maybe, who's a young woman who's in a junior role to me, but who is very active in this space. She is a person who has an interest, has intersectional bias related for herself, and she's very, very vocal in this area. And so I kind of said, this is an area where I should probably not be leading, and I should be listening. And so I've engaged myself in areas of the business and the organization where I can be listening and I can be participating, and where I have like an ability to check in and to be thoughtful about these things. My organization has a lot of focus on this, which means there's a lot of tools and things available to me when I'm thinking about this. I actually can't think of a single time that I've been on a team in my organization that has not had individuals of diverse backgrounds on it. Like, it just, and it's not cases where I am the only woman on the team. That's also never happened, right? So, but I think to your point about focusing on intent, that's got to be there, and always kind of taking a step back and being mindful of what I don't know, right? And kind of saying, this is my lived experience. I know my lived experience. What don't I know? What am I not thinking about in this scenario? What am I not thinking about when I'm making decisions that do impact people's career paths? What am I thinking about when I do make decisions about who's on my team? And kind of apply that lens and think about it deliberately, rather than going with, go with my gut or whatever I think is right on paper, and taking that second look and applying that lens to it. So I'm never going to assume that I can replicate that experience or that knowledge, but I can at least factor that into my decision making and say to myself, did I think about this when I made these decisions? Did I think about this before I made these decisions? Did I think about this while I was going through there? And consider that as we move forward, and then turn around and listen and learn more and ask what I can do better next time when I don't do it right.
I love this question, and as I saw it come in, I was reflecting on how I would answer it. I thought that openness to listen and to acknowledge that we don't always get it right, and whether that is for us leading with intent, and maybe I'm overly naive in this, but I tend to believe that people lead with positive intent, and that intent is maybe they find themselves in a trip up that they didn't mean to be, right? So we talk about unconscious bias and that confusion between values and bias, and it's not the same thing. And so that awareness in terms of, so how do you have a conversation then? How do you become an ally when it's tricky and it's sensitive? But in my experience, I found I lead with positive intent and suggest some ways that somebody might not recognize perhaps the trip up that they've made, and to start also to include that in my own awareness of my own bias. So Karen, I loved what you said in terms of recognizing and acknowledging your own lived experience. then, an example that I'll use, and this might resonate with some people in the audience, it might not. The generation that I grew up with became very used to what is now the LGBTQ plus community. But at the time when I was going through high school, that was just not the normal course of what we were trained to accept. And it was curious and it was different. But when I was going through high school, it was less of an issue. When we accepted people for who they were, and it didn't matter. My parents didn't have that same experience, but I grew up with a different experience, and one that then when I came to the workplace, I was very aware and sensitive that I never asked anybody whether I assumed that they had a husband or wife. I never put myself, or I was conscious about putting myself in the position about asking something that was based on my experiences, right? And so that's an easy one that I would say is an example that I learned that behavior as it was normal. And to me, it was normal. It was my lived experience. And to others, it was one that they had to adjust to. But I feel like that's a great example that there's been so much progress made that, our acceptance of differences, and there's more that we can do, right? So what are understanding that we lead with positive intent, but what are those other places that maybe we're just not there yet, and we need to seek to understand, ask ourselves some questions, have some own awareness, and be an ally, so that when we see those missteps happen, that we can be that ally that assumes positive intent, but can correct some of the behavior. When it comes to unconscious bias, it's been very powerful, I think, in our organization. And so the question, as I saw it, came in is, what are you doing in your organization? And particularly over the last 2 years, where we arrived when I think our organization became really sensitive to what our employees were feeling, is we started with a listening tour. And how powerful is that? A listening tour to really listen to what employees had to say, and where perhaps our experience as an executive leadership team was not the same lived experience as the employees, and what we could do differently in being authentic and open to have that. So I guess what I would summarize that with is, what I constantly try to remind myself and the values I live by is I think most people generally tend to lead with positive intent. And so that when mistakes happen, an acknowledgement of saying, oh geez, I got that wrong, I'm going to do it differently the next time, that we listen, that we ask questions, and we train ourselves that the experiences that we've had are not the same experiences that others have, so that we can be more inclusive by design in so many more ways than the ways that perhaps we've been trained as we've grown up.
Beth, anything you want to add to that?
I think one of the things for me over the last couple of years, Colleen, is coming back to your comment about being in a position of privilege, either economically or frankly because we're white, straight women. I have my CFO who's amazing. She's in Montreal. She's a Black woman. And I'll just give this as an anecdote. I think spending a lot of time talking to her and understanding her lived experience, but also understanding what she needs, what is helpful, what is useful to her from me in terms of intentional inclusion. So it's a simple example, but I was interviewed for, I think, CPA magazine, because there's this curious CPA who's running a law firm, and that apparently made for an interesting article in their mind. And in it, I referenced, changes to the team, and that I'd hired a female CPA in Montreal. And Andrea said, "Oh, thank you so much for referencing me in the interview." She said, "Next time you do that, can you please make a point of saying I'm a Black woman?" And I said, "Oh, that's so interesting, Andrea, because I actually purposely didn't say that, because would that be a wrong thing to do?" And anyways, we had this fascinating conversation about it. And she said, "There are so few of us." She said, "We need to shout it from the rooftops when there's one of us. And I need you to use your network, your platform, when you have access to the mic, to raise my profile and those of others in my network," which I thought was just a great life lesson. So I think it is through that listening, right, that we learn how to be intentional about inclusion and be great allies, to use your word, Monique. But unless you have the conversations and you're authentically listening and learning and being humble that you need to learn, then, you know, we can't be.
But that's a perfect story. That's a perfect story because it really does, you know, where she was able to communicate how you could be a better ally.
Yeah.
For anybody who's got the book, well, y'all have the book, but there's a story from Daria Thorpe, who is the CEO of ICT. It's a technology, a lab company. And she tells her story as a Russian woman who immigrated to Canada. And it reminds me of the importance of that, of us all having EQ awareness and that we're thoughtful. Like she said, like, I didn't watch your cartoons. I have no idea about any of your cartoons. I was not socialized in your country. Like, I don't get your jokes. And now she says it way more eloquently than I just did. But that moment to reflect on the other person's life pathway and where they might have come from and why it might be different than yours and how you could support them. I remember at E-Trade, the head of my tech team was an amazing woman, but she said, when I got here, she said, I had to learn everything. I had to learn Subway. I had to learn healthcare. I had to learn English. I had 2 kids and I had to help them along. And it was just, she said, you've no idea. And I was doing that while I was doing my job. And I thought, you know what, you have so much more work every day than I do. And I feel sometimes we need to really think a lot and thoughtfully about what is going on in somebody else's head and what their pathway is. And, you know, there's something about walking a mile in somebody else's shoes, but really understanding that and bringing that to bear in your interactions with people. But the listening part is a big piece. Okay, so how long are we allowed to go? I'm just mindful that, you know, we're not the 4 last people in the room. And when I go back and sort of say, what other questions? Anna asked about whether there was a role model on your journey that you'd like to give a shout out to, or someone else asked a question on what advice would you give to your younger self if you got to do it again? Either any of you like those questions and want to respond to them?
I'm going to answer the younger self one, and I've got 2 answers. And there's like a serious answer and a semi-serious answer. So the first thing is get a dog sooner. Get a dog sooner is what I would tell my younger self, because for me, having a dog has just given me like so much grounding when I'm anxious and stressed. Going out for a walk with the dog and having the dog at home. And I know there's people, I know I could probably name them, who are laughing at me right now with that, but get a dog sooner, because I always thought, oh, I won't have time. And what I didn't realize was the benefit of that. And to everyone else, you know, the dog might be something else. It might be, you know, some hobby or something, you know, start running sooner or something. But for me, that's my kind of grounding, anxiety relieving thing, part of my life, that especially during this past 18 months when we've kind of been restricted from moving around, has been the thing that kind of comes to me during the day. But my more serious side of this is nobody else remembers your mistakes the way that you do. So, and this is something that I wish I'd understood younger, because even to this day, sometimes I flash back and go, oh, that boneheaded thing I said when I was 12. Nobody else remembers it at all. And so I think I could have saved myself a lot of stress and maybe trepidation about risk taking. I think I could have been a little bit more confident if I'd realized from an earlier age, an earlier point in my career, that I am not the center of everyone else's narrative. everyone is the center of their own narrative, and no one else is going to remember this goofy thing that I did, or the time that I tripped when I came into the room, or the time I, called my teacher mom, or whatever that embarrassing moment is that still grates on me. And I think that when we're looking and making decisions about risk taking, or taking a leap of faith, or moving ahead, or asking the question, even simple decisions like that, the knowledge that this is a minor part of this person's day, and it's not gonna be a permanent blot if it doesn't go exactly right. And it's something I've learned now. And I think about what Beth said about as you age, and whoever it was who said the patina of experience and knowledge. And I'm like, that is the thing that I wish I could tell all the younger selves that I am, and all the younger selves out there, which is don't sweat it that much. No one's going to remember.
That's a fantastic answer. Thank you, Karen.
Thanks.
Anybody else?
There's probably lots of things, Colleen, but one thing that comes to mind, I think it's important to find someone who can hold the mirror up for you. And what I mean by that is, earlier in your career, when you are getting lots of mentoring and coaching, and you're looking at role models, and you're reading, and you're experimenting with different ways to lead and be, you can get off track and mold yourself in others' images. And I think for women, it's just that much more complicated. Maybe not as much now as it was a decade ago, in terms of, can you still be feminine and have a personality with your clothing, or do you need to fit the mold? Maybe some of that is better than it used to be. Maybe not for women in certain industries, but having somebody who can hold a mirror up to you and say, you know what, you're actually losing track of who Beth really is. I think that that would be great to have earlier in your career, I would say. And then, this is an old adage, but I really believe it. People remember how you made them feel, not what you said, right? That is so important.
Monique?
I love that imagery of somebody who can hold the mirror up for you. And Beth, you spoke to it in terms of not losing sight of, or losing track of who you are. There's so many times we say yes when we should have said no. There's so many times that, we get lost in whatever it is that we're delivering, and lose track of whether or not we're on track. The flip side of that mirror is celebrating those times that you've undervalued your own success or your own experience. And so I often answer this question of, I would tell my younger self to have more confidence, to take more risks, and to truly, I'm sure that is not going to surprise anybody to hear that, but when I think back early on in my career at some of the experiences and the successes I had, I undervalued them. I undervalued the impact. I undervalued what I'd really delivered. And I just thought that was normal, because it was normal for me. I didn't think it differentiated myself. So having somebody who could have held up that mirror to me to say, no, that thing you did, keep doing that thing. Keep, and recognizing those successes. And we're often so critical of ourselves, and, the trip ups that we had, gosh, how many times have I come home from the office and labored over, just thought about the stupid thing I said in a conversation, or having the better answer that I should have had, 2 hours after the conversation happened. And that point, but nobody remembers that. So let that go, and instead focus on those places that you really hit a home run and have the confidence that those were places that I'd hit a home run, and take more risks to do more of those things.
Yeah, the taking risks is a big one.
Does everybody do you have a feel good folder, Colleen, where you stick those emails, or, if you leave or switch jobs, it's like going to your own funeral, right? You get all the notes. You don't remember this, but you had a huge impact on me 10 years ago. Somebody told me pretty early on to save those things and to pull them out when you're getting into a new hoop and you're like, can I really do this? Or you're feeling really crappy about yourself, or the imposter syndrome, you've got that gnarly thing on your shoulder telling you can't do it, and dig in. If people don't have one, you should start one. It's amazing to go back and look at some of those things in your moments of reflection for a source of energy and confidence. Maybe it's a bit like a mirror, Monique, in terms of holding it up to yourself, but
No, I'm with you on that. Like there was Tim Calladaz did an article once, one of those coffee, you have coffee with or have lunch with, on me and my role. And my assistant, God bless her soul, she passed, but she took all of the emails that people sent to me after that. They found me from everywhere, from old days at Merrill Lynch in the 80s and in the 90s. And they, and like, I just wanted to tell you, and she put it in and she made me a book.
See,
And that was such a gift, because it was a gift that people wrote it in the first place, but it's still a gift to me to know that the things we do have impact, and that we can all make the world a better place, and that people remember it. It's just, it's a wonderful thing. So I that feel good file, I don't think it buys me $1 more in anything, but it is a great joy, and it makes me understand why I do whatever I do. I think it is a wonderful thing. See, there's Shannon thinks it's a wonderful idea too. Okay. Now, here is a question. When it comes to gender equity and compensation, do you think there remains a pay gap between male and female leaders in C roles? Yes. Okay. Have you experienced this in your own career as part of your journey? And what advice would you have to this audience in overcoming this obstacle and bridging the gap? So I want to first take this one because it actually is a bit of a bone with me. I love the fact that Mark Beniak came out at Salesforce and said, I'm going to true up comp across the organization. And the sad thing is he has to do that every year, and it costs him $6 to $10 million to do it every year after he did it once. So all that means is it is endemic and it crawls back into the system. I remember I did a panel, and it was a real estate panel for Crew about 150 years ago. And if anybody was there, Nancy actually, Prevost was one of the women who had organized it. And I was on a panel with a guy, and that question came up, and he said, no, I don't really think so. And I said, hey, you know what? I appreciate what you just said, except for you just did a talk with me, and you told me how in your first year in the organization, you asked for a new job and better comp 3 times. Okay? Like, you ask all the time. It seems to be something you started with and you've been doing ever since. I said, I got to tell you, most women don't do that. We expect we will be noticed, recognized, and rewarded based on our contribution. And we expect that we shouldn't have to ask. We find it humiliating or humbling to ask. So that is an old style answer to that, which is maybe slightly inappropriate, but I expect has some resonance. So don't be afraid to double check. And as an advocate and an ally, you should be doing it in your organization for people who work in your organization, because it is those who ask get. And unfortunately, it is not always women doing the asking. Okay, so that was a little bit over the top. I apologize for that. I'll sit right back here. Anybody else have anything that they'd like to share in that regard?
I don't think there's much more to say on top of that. Colleen, you pretty much nailed it.
Oh my God, it is one of the things that I like. It's just like it's going to be here for a long time, because style and approach to asking for comp has to a degree some gender nuances that will play a part, and you hope that your organization will take care of it, but that's hard. It's hard to do, hard to compare.
Yeah, and I think when you're in the same organization for a long time, all like the cumulative, it's like compound interest, right? The cumulative impact of that is massive. So, and I know there's some studies that have been done to quantify it, but if you think about the impact of parental leaves for women, and they, even companies that say they're neutral and put somebody back in at the place they started, well, in the meantime, everybody else has moved on. Like there is a penalty there that can follow you through your entire earnings history, unless there's some way to hit a reset button.
Well, I think, Beth, you're at a law firm. I'm at a law firm. Tatiana's at a law firm. When you step out to go on pregnancy leave as a partner, what happens is you maybe don't pick up files for long files 6 months in advance. People don't add you to the work product. And then when you come back, it's a little while to come back in. So that impacts comp. And much as we try to, in our organizations, impact that positively and understand the value of women in their 40s and 50s in the power that they bring into relationships. And in a legal context, that means having and leading complex matters. It is equal access to opportunity is where comp comes from. And somebody has mentioned an interesting documentary on Netflix. Adriana, that's you. Explained why women are paid less. So I know I always have a running notepad on my things for Netflix. By the way, the one on the Velvet Underground so far, not so good. And I love the Velvet Underground, by the way, but I think you can pass on it. Any other questions? Are we to go on until we've put everybody to sleep? Adriana, what's the deal? How long do you want us like hanging around here like whatever?
So I'm coming in. Thank you so much. Well, I think that was the time, 8:30. We passed.
Was it?
A little bit. Yes. Oh, I don't know what's happening with my camera. Okay, I'm blurry now.
Don't worry, I look like a ghost. I look like a Halloween outfit.
So weird. Anyway, well, thank you so much. It was beautiful. I hope that everybody enjoyed. Bethy, Monique, Karen, thank you for joining us. And Colleen, what a beautiful job you have done, bringing all of these women together in this beautiful book. So if someone had a problem with the book, let me know, send to Sharon or to myself, and we figure out what's happening. Okay, well, thank you so much. I don't know, Tatiana, Sharon, do you want to share anything?
I was going to say, I think Megan wants to give a shout out to you guys who organized. It was great books, great food, all of the elements that makes one of these things work. And I know how thoughtful you were, even with my assistant organizing. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all. Well, have a good night, everybody, and see you around.
All right.